illness and also head injury, so very important that we're all on the same page. It doesn't matter if you field, boundary or goal, definitely the preparation, and we know how hot it's been the first 5 rounds of the season with bugger all rain to date is really important. So Glenn's going to touch on that and also on the concussion side of things, which obviously for us, duty of care as umpires to make sure that if there is someone injured that we take the appropriate steps. And then we'll also, I'm sure Glenn will be happy to do a bit of Q&A. So he's given up his time. He's kind of finished one job, come quickly here, and then he's got to go to another meeting, 6:30, 7 o'clock tonight. So very busy man. So I'll pass it over to Glenn.
Thanks very much, guys. So Glenn Imber, I'm an intensive care paramedic and station officer here in Darwin with St John Ambulance. And thanks very much to Catherine and to Mark for, initiating my involvement here tonight. Tonight, first of all, a little bit of explanation for those that don't know that great man. He's Darryl Baldock, great St Kilda man. I can put him up there because a couple of things in common. One, we're both Tasmanian, and two, we're at this time, we're both, I am at least, a bit of a disgruntled St Kilda supporter, but who knows? There might be a future yet, who knows? I've lived sort of in the tropics for about 10 years now, and coming from Tasmania, have had, a bit of a climatisation change and some challenges. There's probably no more extreme than being an athlete going out in these sorts of temperatures. So regardless of your fitness level, we all can respond slightly differently to the challenges the heat, and in particular the humidity can put upon us. So we're going to have a bit of a brief talk about heat illnesses tonight and the various stages, and just how to identify who's suffering from some heat illnesses, how to try and mitigate or lessen the risk of becoming a casualty to a heat illness. And we're also going to briefly touch on head injuries, huge topic, but we're just going to look at basically what the AFL guidelines are with respect to concussion in particular, and I'm just going to touch on a few topics around concussion as well. Please feel free to ask me any questions at any stage. If I say something that you don't quite understand or you don't agree with, by all means raise it. Happy to have a discussion. So, heat illnesses. As I said, coming from Tasmania, I haven't, although it does used to get warm down there occasionally. Wasn't too much of an issue. Up here, obviously, is a huge complaint for us. I used to work in Broome, do a bit of work at the hospital in there, and we used to, people that come in the emergency department in there, we used to talk about a Kimberley litre, and that was basically any person that walked through the door, we gave them a litre of fluids intravenously, so into their veins, simply because typically anyone that walks off the street or gets dragged in off the street is dehydrated. At rest, our body, just through its normal metabolism, just doing what it does, increases by temperature. The body temperature increases by 1 degree per hour. So you can imagine if we didn't have a cooling mechanism in place, we'd soon heat up. Now, that increases tenfold as soon as we start doing some physical activity. So, once again, if we didn't have our natural cooling mechanisms in place, or some artificial ones like air conditioning, we'd actually increase our temperature by about 10 degrees every hour, which is quite significant. Our body temperature normally runs around about the 37 degree mark, okay, and we don't go well with changes in that. Once we drop below about 35, which doesn't often happen up here, or get above around the 39 to 40 degree mark, we start showing significant signs of heat illnesses. So obviously things like solar radiation adds to our temperature, and that's, I mean, let's face it, you guys go out in the day in the sun, and the sun heat is another thing that adds to your own metabolism, your own body's movement and so forth, with increases heat. So solar radiation, in particular for you guys, is another thing that increases our body temperatures. So how do we cool down? Well, everybody knows that we sweat. So once we get hot inside, our blood vessels towards our skin start to open up, dilate as we call it, and then our blood moves to our extremities.
Yeah, but sweating caused by evaporation, but isn't it when the wind blows against it?
Yep, good point, and I'll get to that in a sec. Yep. So what happens is that our blood vessels dilate around close to our skin, and then our blood goes to basically to our skin. When we sweat, the evaporation actually causes a cooling of the skin, and therefore it cools the blood, and then that gets to move back to the centre of our body. Now, things like a breeze adds to that cooling mechanism. So if we're in a cool air, we're in a breeze, or you've got a fan on you, absolutely that increases the amount of cooling that happens as part of evaporation. But generally speaking, just a normal sweating and that sweat evaporating will actually cause the cooling of the skin. So that's how we normally cool ourselves. That's the pretty standard thing up this way. Now, evaporation accounts for about 25% of our heat loss. So it's quite a significant mechanism. It's one of the mechanisms, and a significant one that we use to cool our body down. Now, the problem we face, of course, is when it's humid up here, and let's face it, we're sort of heading into the humid time of the year. It really renders evaporation ineffective. So what I'm saying is that if the air around you is, say, 80% humidity, so 80% already saturated with liquid, then the amount of evaporation that you get and the benefit of that evaporation is really quite significant. And for those that have spent any time sort of away from the coastline, so you spend a bit of time inland, you'll know that it gets damn hot there, but the humidity is quite low. So if you get yourself under a tree and a bit of breeze or something like that, and you start to sweat, you cool down really quite nicely. Here on the coast, where typically the temperatures don't reach as high as they do sort of in the desert lands, we don't have that luxury of utilising the evaporation process to its full extent. So, what do we do about someone that's suffering from heat illness? Well, I guess first thing we need to do is look at trying to remove them from a cool area. So we go. It's not like a line in the sand where you're okay 1 minute and then you crook the next minute. It's a gradual thing, okay? And I mean, our natural response, you go outside and you start to run around tonight, your heart rate's going to go up, you're going to start sweating, your respiratory rate's going to go up, and all that sort of stuff. So it's a gradual thing. Now, if we kept you out there running and running and running, then eventually you're going to get to the stage where you go past just having some early signs of some heat illnesses. You'll probably then go into heat exhaustion, and then you may go to heat stroke. And once you get to heat stroke, then you're sort of in a fair bit of strife. So as I said, it's a gradual sort of process, and what we need to do is keep an eye on people around us, and just see when we think, they might not be travelling too well. Now, as I said, people respond to these sorts of situations all very differently, and some, for example, I sweat quite a bit. Might have something to do with my fitness level, I'm not sure. I sweat quite a bit, but so therefore I need to maintain a lot of fluids. Now, you get somebody that's beside me that's not sweating as much. Does that mean that that I'm not coping with the heat as well? Well, not necessarily. So as I said, people do vary quite a bit. But what we need to do is, and obviously this is, I'm sure the clubs. I don't know the full legal responsibilities from the umpire's perspective, but I'm sure the clubs are very. They're responsible for looking after their own crews. They need to try and get these people away to a cooler area. The middle of the football field isn't a particularly cool area, so that's perhaps when they need to cart them off and get them into the change rooms. You mentioned before, mate, about airflow, and you're absolutely right. That will definitely assist in cooling people down. So we talk about maybe try and put them under a bit of a fan if they can. Maybe spray a bit of water on them and stuff like that. What that does helps with evaporation. Right. What we don't want to do is chuck them in an ice cold bath or something like that. Not that you're likely to have one floating around here, but that's quite a bad thing to do for these sorts of people. Yep. No, look, the cool's okay. Yep. But what happens if you've dropped somebody into something that's freezing cold, literally freezing cold? Straight away, the body's response is to shut those blood vessels down in that area. So you can imagine if someone's really hot internally, they're really dilated on their peripheries, on the outsides, and we drop them into literally a freezing cold bath of ice. All that's going to basically happen to them is that the outside will just shut down. They won't have that blood flow to the outside, and all that hot blood that's inside the middle of them will stay there, and will have basically nowhere to go. Okay, so it's a really bad thing. This all comes, and as I was saying before about how people respond to the heat, it comes with acclimatisation, and the longer that you're in an area like this, for example, the things like the constitution of your sweat changes. So, like I said before, I sweat a lot, and I've had 10 years in the tropics, so my sweat typically is basically just water. Okay, whereas you might get somebody that comes from Tasmania, you drag them up here and you make them run around a pitch, and their sweat content is made up of all different sorts of stuff, but primarily we look at things like salt. They'll have a really high salt content in their sweat until they eventually acclimatise and they end up retaining a bit more of the salt. Okay, so that's just a little bit about acclimatisation. Things like putting cold packs to areas that have high blood flow, things like towards their groins, under their arms and around their neck, is a really good thing. But when I say cold packs, don't get an ice brick and stick it directly on their skin, because once again, it's a bit like dropping them in an ice bath. Not particularly good. Just wrap it in a tea towel or something, and just keep it just away from the skin, or have a barrier just between the actual ice pack or the cold pack and the skin. And that'll, it gets very close to the big blood vessels and cools down a lot of blood very quickly. Okay, so that's another method that we can use if you're in such a good environment. Oral fluids are good. You give them some cool oral fluids, but for goodness sake, don't let them drink, copious amounts. Let them have sips only. Okay, because typically, when someone's going through the phases of heat illness, their gut will become irritated. They may well have vomited. The last thing you want to do is drink a litre of water, because it's going to come straight back up again. It's going to irritate the gut a bit more, and it'll make that the gut more hostile to any more fluids going in. So small sips, and that will help rehydrate them. Depending on your medical capabilities, like if we turn up, for example, St John's, the paramedic side of St John's turn up, we can put a drip in them, give them cold fluids into their veins, and that'll definitely help them along their way. Water versus electrolytes. Like I said, I sweat a lot, so most of my sweat is water. So generally speaking, I'm okay just to have water, but I'm not suggesting for a moment there isn't a place for electrolytes. I do some triathlons and Ironmans and stuff, so I'm used to reasonably prolonged sort of periods of exercise, and I do take on electrolytes during the course of those sorts of things. but once again, it's a graduated sort of thing. You know, for you guys that are out on the park for a couple of hours, absolutely, there's probably scope for. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if, and I'll just pluck some figures out of the air here. It wouldn't surprise me if some of you guys go through, literally lose in the vicinity of up to 10 litres of water during that period. That's through sweat, and also we actually lose a lot of moisture as we breathe out, because our air is in our lungs is actually is humidified as well. Yep.
Sorry, Glenn. So I know a lot of our Premier League crew weigh each other before games.
Oh, yep.
It varies between, depending on the field of boundary umpires, anywhere between, I suppose, 3 to 5 litres on a regular basis. So obviously that 2 to 1 ratio of replacement is probably the key, I reckon.
Yeah, sure.
We've got a lot of new umpires that probably don't replace enough after their games.
So you say up to 5. Is that from the?
So weight-wise on the scales, the hot line beforehand.
Yep. Do they drink during that period of time?
I have little sips along the way when they can.
Oh, but not a huge amount. Okay. All right. Well, there you go. Yep. All right. So that's really good, because I mean I wasn't really sure how much you guys may lose, but yeah. I mean I can go for like a 10k run and find that I've lost a kilo. That's obviously a litre of water without a problem. So it's pretty easy to start losing fluids. And you know, somebody like myself, I have about maybe about 6 litres of blood. Okay, so if you pull out 2 or 3 litres out of me, you can see, you know, how dehydrated I would be after that. So, you know, replenishing some fluids along the way is really good. And like Mark said, if you guys have got a regime on what you do with water and electrolytes, that's fantastic. You know, as I said, that may well vary from person to person, but you'll sort that out as you move along. One thing about losing too much salt is, salt's a really important thing in our body, and in particular, it affects our brain a lot, and that's where people become disorientated and stuff. It's just starting to lose their brain function effectively, and that's a real key indicator for somebody that's going through that heat illness phase. Yeah.
If you come off the game and you're 5 kilo lighter, would that mean that you actually haven't drunk enough during the game?
Look, I mean, you might have preloaded a bit before. Once again,
you haven't preloaded, you
well, yeah. I mean, if you've lost a kilo, look, a kilo for an adult is probably, you know, neither here nor there. But you know, for these younger guys here, that would be quite significant, I'd suggest. But yeah, look, a kilo. I mean, I guess ideally you should finish.
5 kilo. Become 5 kilo lighter.
Oh yeah.
So like as an adult.
That's not flash.
And as an adult, 2 kilos. You think, well, maybe I should have drunk a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, but the other thing is, I mean, your body will, you know, like I said, it varies so much from person to person. There's not just one rule we can apply to everybody, you know, and you'll soon know. I mean, one key indicator is how much urine you make. Oh, what's happened there? How much urine you make, how much urine you make, because if you don't make any urine, that means your kidneys aren't getting perfused, and you haven't got enough blood pumping around your body, you know. So yeah, it's if you come off 5 kilos lighter, I would suggest, particularly someone, I'm just looking at you, that wouldn't be. I think you'd be rather sick if you were in that situation. Yeah. Yep. I said before, don't drop them in a bath of freezing water, because that's really bad for them. It's going to cause that for the outside of their body to really vessels to shut down, and all their heat will remain inside. So that's I guess that's probably a bit of a quick one on heat illnesses. I guess, as I said, if we progress to the next step, it's heat stroke. and that's when somebody, effectively cannot control their temperature any further. It starts to spike. They'll go into kidney failure. They'll end up causing lots of little clots all over their body, and they'll end up having like some inflammatory responses in their head and swelling in their brain, and unfortunately they will end up going out the door in a rather nasty way. So it is absolutely a life-threatening situation once we get to that sort of thing.
When you're talking about ice baths, just wanted to clarify because
Yep.
we've actually used ice baths for work,
Yep.
but not. There's two types of ice baths. There's an ice bath you use after a game for muscle recovery,
Absolutely.
right? And then at work we'll use cool water
Yes.
ice bath to bring core body temperature down.
Spot on, yeah. So, what I'm talking about here is heat illnesses, and I totally understand what you're saying. I'm not getting an ice bath, no way. That's why I live in the tropics. But I hear what you're saying about muscle recovery, absolutely. That's to slow down the inflammatory responses and tissue damage and stuff, and that's a completely different mechanism than what we're talking about actually cooling the core temperature of a person. Effectively it will cool them down as well, of course, but not for somebody that's suffering from heat illnesses.
We did some testing a few years ago and we used cool ice baths.
Yep.
Freezing. Cool
Yep.
ice baths, misting fans, Slurpees and shady water.
Yep.
And we had the guys work over a 3-hour cycle, 30 minutes on, 30 minutes off, over 3 cycles.
Oh yeah, yep.
And we found that the guys that were able to use the ice bath, their core temperatures were lower over the entire 3-hour period, and their work rate as it went on was better, and they were more productive over that 3-hour period.
Yeah, wow.
So, but not ice baths.
Yeah.
Call them ice baths, but cool water.
Cool water, that's right. Yeah, spot on.
And the whole idea was about the body surface area that you're able to get, immerse your body in water and bring that core temperature down a little bit more.
Yeah, excellent. Good. Okay, so just if we can just keep pushing on, because I know you guys are on a pretty tight time schedule here. So I've used the sort of umbrella term of head injuries. So that's obviously anyone that gets smacked in the head as far as you guys are concerned. There are other definitions to it, but we're talking about any sort of head injury. Yeah, mate.
Can loss of fluid, like dehydration, make like actual brain injuries?
Absolutely. So like I was saying before, it can cause like an inflammatory response. A bit like if you tear a muscle, you get an inflammatory response, and the brain doesn't handle that sort of inflammatory response very well, and it can cause lots of fluid to go around to be accumulated in the brain, and lots of fluid in the brain is not good either, and that can cause dysfunction to the brain and something nasty, really nasty to happen. Yep.
Is there a chance for it to be permanent?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And if somebody dies from heat illness, it is typically that they'll have some sort of nasty brain event, and they'll go out from that. Yeah, so good idea to avoid it. All right, so like I was saying, head injuries, we're talking about mechanical strikes sort of thing here, and I'm sure you guys are very aware that there's been lots of discussion and research over the last number of years about contact sports and things like boxing, all the forms of football and so on, and the potential ongoing injuries to people, to sports people that suffer from head injuries, and in particular the AFL have looked at concussions as a huge topic, and is very strictly regulated. I'm sure you're aware now on how teams manage their people that have been hit in the head, or their heads hit the ground, for example. So first of all, the first thing that they say is you need to recognise the injury. Now, I did play a couple of years of country footy, and I was knocked out once or twice, but it can be pretty. Sometimes it can be pretty obvious when someone's got a smack to the head, and sometimes it can't be. A lot of stuff, I guess, can just slip by the view of the officiating staff and even some of the team sports people. So you need to try and recognise injuries. Straight away, they need to be, if it's been identified that it's a significant injury, they need to be removed from the game. And I don't really have a comprehension of exactly what your role here is, but I know that a lot of the onus would go back to the. I'm sure you guys would have to recognise that someone's been injured in some way, and then you'd have to go to their team and then identify that one of their team members are injured. And then I'm sure that the onus would then be put onto that team to manage it from that point on. And I'm happy to take from whoever wants to throw in there what your responsibilities are, but I'm sure that you guys are pretty well briefed on that.
Yeah, I mean, for us really, and especially for our newer field umpires, that obviously recognising the serious injury and making sure that you get the attention, hopefully the players have got the attention of their sports trainer already. And for us, it's a matter of following the, I suppose, our procedures that we emailed out last week and stuff around the change rooms. That duty of care, ask the sports trainer, do we need a stretcher, do we need to call a blood rule here and find out of the sports trainer what the go is before we resume play, instead of just trying to race ahead and get the game going. Like it's said on the sheet, we've got in the lower grades, so yes, there's no time on, but players' safety and welfare is above all else. That's our duty of care, especially as field umpire side of point of view. So if that means that if the player's knocked out and they need to get a stretcher on there and it takes 40 minutes, then it takes 40 minutes. The game doesn't go ahead. So we've really got to communicate a lot more effectively with the sports trainers, because every team's got a sports trainer in their junior footy clubs and in their adult women's teams as well. So making sure we just follow that correct procedure.
Thank you. So these recommendations come straight from the AFL website, and they say that obviously refer to the player to the medical doctor for assessment. Now, I do understand that not all games have doctors at them, and I think they use under 16s, I think, as the benchmark for a first aider versus a sports trainer, or exactly how they define it, I'm not exactly sure. But like Marcus just said, it's you guys just need to identify the event and then get their representatives to make the decision on where they go from there. But safety is absolutely paramount. And this is, I guess, looking a bit further down the track as far as the AFL are concerned, and that's to just ensure that the players received medical clearance to return. Now, that might be that that they go through some concussion testing and they are okay to return to that game, or it may be that they're absolutely ruled out of this game, and it may in fact impact on when they're allowed to train at normal levels in the ensuing weeks, and then graduate back into playing in a number of weeks' time, for example. I guess the take-home message from the AFL is, if in doubt, sit them out. Okay, so it really is, player safety is absolutely paramount. Doesn't matter how good they are, how vital an asset they are to the team. It's their well-being and their future that everybody has to be very mindful of. I guess going along with head injuries, so that's sort of all based around concussion sort of stuff. If they have a serious head injury, this person is probably going to be unconscious and basically not rousable or very combative or something like that. And that is an absolute medical emergency. There's no question about, are they going to continue in the game. and that sort of stuff needs to be referred to the highest possible level of medical care that you can get, and it gets escalated. So, for example, it might be the senior medical person who might even be on the other team at that game. Then they might, for example, call us in, and then we'll take them, for example, here in Darwin, take them to RDH. So it's just an escalation of medical care as quickly as possible. And things like this are absolutely time critical. It's not, oh yeah, look, we'll get it seen to later on today or tomorrow. It must be done now. Okay, I can't stress that enough. We go to I personally go to a lot of people who deteriorate very quickly from that. Just to give you another little snippet of concussion, I went to a lady about 2 months ago now who came off a push bike here in Darwin. She's just on a road bike. She came off. She had a period of unconsciousness. My crew went to her. We were quite concerned about it, so they called me for sort of next level of care. She was really quite combative and stuff like that, and it was to the stage where I was going to have to. I was considering giving her drugs to basically make her unconscious so we could manage her. And as it was, she just had a really severe concussion, but it's probably the most severe I've ever seen. And I've heard reports that even some weeks later, she's still suffering from some symptoms, just in her demeanour and her memory and stuff like that. So it took some time, I think it took a couple of months for her to pretty well fully recover from that. And she was wearing a helmet and stuff like that, wasn't going a particularly fast speed or anything like that, but just came off on a bike track.
Still sick, mate?
Sorry?
You're still sick. Still suffering the effects from it.
All right, thanks, all right. You know her. Okay, you're right. Assuming we're talking about the same person, but yeah, it's quite possible. So yeah, she's pretty. That was one of the situations where I was thinking this person probably isn't concussed. He hasn't probably got a concussion. She's probably that next step where she's actually got a significant head injury. But fortunately, she didn't have. So very, very lucky there. But all I'm saying is that it can be quite profound how they present. Yeah, but are you allowed to what? Sorry.
Didn't hear the question properly.
As an umpire, are you allowed to touch the player?
I mean, ideally, the idea is that we should get the attention of the sports trainer to the bench ASAP. That's our main priority, because the sports trainers are the ones that are actually trained and done the courses to identify the injuries. Pretty rare that we have to touch a player at the best of times, unless it's really serious. And I think the only time I've ever seen that is where it's far side of the ground, we've got the attention of the sports trainer to come in, and we've had to, I've had to hold a bloke's, I suppose, leg kind of in place because it snapped through the skin, but that's very, very, very rare. So, Lance, if you see something serious injury, just blow time, get the attention of the bench so they can get the sports trainer and the sports trainer out to assess it.
Thanks, Mark. That's just the link to the website for the AFL that has a lot of this stuff on concussion, and as I said, they're obviously pretty big on it and have been for some time now. Look, that really sort of, as far as I'm concerned, it concludes the information I've got for you guys. It's pretty brief, pretty broad, but I think just sort of covers off on some of the information Mark was looking for. Is it anybody got any questions for me?
Glenn,
Yeah.
The importance of loading up before a game.
Yep.
Just how important and how much?
Ooh.
I know it's going to depend on.
Absolutely.
The two of us are probably
Yeah.
very different.
Exactly right, and it will vary from person to person, and obviously from what Mark said, there's been a lot of, you guys have done a lot of research into fluid maintenance and so forth. once again, it's pretty hard. I mean, for me, just even for an hour or 2 hour triathlon, I'm probably going to load up. I start loading up the night before, and I'll probably go in. I'll probably go in at about 2 litres over my normal, or say 2 kilos over my normal weight. But that's typically because we jump in the water first and swim, and if it's salt water, you tend to lose a bit more fluid there. So I would normally go in about, and I'm 80 kilos, so I normally go in about 2 kilos over, I guess. But it would vary so much from person to person, and that's a mix of water and electrolytes I'd go in with. But yeah, yep.
Fluid retention, is there a benefit in trying to retain fluid? Are there ways of actually doing that? Loss is the natural component of maintain those.
Yeah, look, I mean, salt intake will retain fluids. I mean, salt attracts fluids. So if you have salt on board, you'll retain fluids. But once again, it's a sort of a sports science stuff which I'm not qualified in at all. I definitely wouldn't be. But then again, put it in context, I'm not an elite athlete by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just a bit of a Sunday thumper. So there's no way I'd try and muck around with my body at my age, because it probably wouldn't handle it too well. No.
So I might be able to add some benefit to this. Part of my preparation, Craig, I'm sure, as a runner yourself at events, I use salt.
Right.
I use South Vital.
Yep.
And I use just marginally less than 4 grams per litre.
Right.
Don't touch it in the first hour of an event, in a marathon, but
Yep.
certainly after that.
Yep.
And that's exactly because of the reason that salt actually assists with the body to absorb water quicker
Yes.
into the system, rather
Yes.
than just water or electrolytes on their own.
Yes.
I'm also very conscious of the amount of salt that I put in my body, because it can have adverse effects as well.
Absolutely.
But I find this is a personal choice, but the South Vital that I've used for about
Yep.
6-7 years now, in very diluted format, actually helps me in those events.
I actually take 2 salt tablets before a game.
Yeah.
My fluid retention
Sure.
has been better.
The biggest thing that came out of the heat study that Matt really did a couple of years ago with the buyers and a few other athletes is your core temperature starts at a certain level. As soon as you start exercising, like you said, it starts to climb. And the only way to bring that core temperature down is to have a period in the pool, have a cool drink like a slushy, which we can't actually do on the paddock. So one of the things he tried to do, and he's doing with the V8 drivers and lots of other football players, is pre-cooling. So you'll get in an ice bath, a really cold ice bath, up to an hour beforehand to actually bring your core temperature down. So
Yeah.
when you're starting from the game, is 2 degrees lower than what you would, which gives you longevity in that particular game itself. So you're in front of the game as opposed to being behind.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And on salt, it's a purely individual thing. Some people will be great for,
Yep.
others will have a serious side effect of swelling.
Yep.
There's a bloke that went to East Timor, does that, takes salt tablets, and he ended up with cankles because his legs swelled up that far. His ankles were going.
I was going to say, great hobby runner.
Why is everyone looking at me for?
When did you go to East Timor?
Hello.
What signals is your body going to give you that you are approaching heat illness or dehydration?
Yep, good question. Like I said, the immediate thing, so it's a bit of a graduation thing, and as I said, the immediate thing is that, we'll go out, heart rate will go up, respiratory rate will go up, we'll start to sweat. That's all pretty normal. It's when that starts to, we start to decompensate, we can't manage to continue like that. So, you'll start to get fatigued walking up the stairs here. You start to get fatigued. Your mind will not be all that sharp. Like I said, loss of salt directly affects the brain. It affects all your body, but in particular affects your brain function. So you become fatigued and a bit disorientated, or your decisions might not be the sharpest. Then it will progress perhaps to things like muscle cramping, nausea and vomiting. Sorry.
It's difficult when I become dehydrated, I can't quench my thirst. So no matter
Yeah.
I can't clench it.
Yeah. Don't know. Yeah. So sorry. That's where you go to until until as I said, things like cramping or stuff like that might. I mean, it'll once again vary from person to person, but cramping might be the main thing that stops you, or the vomiting or something like that.
Occasion I was approaching the illness and all of a sudden I got blazing sun all the game of chills.
Yep.
Chills all over my body and it sort of went downhill from there.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yep.
So I don't know if that's a general indicator, but
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, it can be. I mean, as I said, that's the idea, is to sort of get really cool on the outside. So you try to cool that blood, so then it can be pumped on the inside, into the centre, you obviously you've just really sort of focused on that really cooling thing. Yeah. Yes, mate.
Most of the time get headaches when I get dehydrated. Is that like a normal symptom?
It is, because what happens there is your brain's got a lot of fluid around it, and if you start taking all the fluid out of there, it's sort of held in place with like strings and stuff, and these strings start to pull as your brain sort of starts to drop down and hang on these strings, and it's like, oh dear, that's starting to hurt. So that's where you get your headache from, mate. Yeah. There's a question there, sorry. Yeah.
would your sweating rate slow down a lot? Like you might basically
Eventually, because what happens, you not only lose fluid out of your blood, but it will start dragging fluid out of everywhere and bring it into your blood, and then it gets pumped to your skin and it sweats out through there. So you start to literally dry out, and eventually you'll get to the stage where you don't sweat anymore. And the really bad sign is the person that is red, is not sweating where they were perhaps previously sweating. That's like really, really significant alarm bells. That's like, yeah, that's really, really bad.
And with cramp, is that cramp due to dehydration?
Well, it can be partly dehydration and also lack of electrolytes. So you sweat out your electrolytes, and it affects how the muscles contract and release, and they'll end up just contracting.
What do you do with somebody who's got cramp? Because I've had two conflicting ways last year. One says stretch the muscle, the other one says no, don't, because the muscle will snap or something. So this person's going,
Sorry?
Stop exercise
Yeah.
immediately, rehydrate, and slow gentle stretching to get the
Exactly.
cramp out.
Yeah. So it's just through muscle fatigue and loss of those electrolytes and stuff that's caused it. So you need to walk backwards.
rolling over on the ground, they've got cramp.
Yep.
Do you try and straighten the leg out?
Look, sometimes people say that'll help, but ultimately they need to stop doing what they're doing and rehydrate. But I know some. Stretch my leg, and you go, yeah, like that, and then they say, oh, that's better. Yeah, thanks very much. But they need to, if that's happened, then they need to go, why has that happened? Okay, let's fix what caused it.
I heard that drinking milk alleviates it quite fast. For some reason I don't.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if someone's suffering from heat illness, last thing I'll give them is milk, though.
No, apparently with the
Yeah, don't know.
Okay, last
Right.
couple of questions, because we've obviously got to keep poor Glenn's got to go to another appointment.
That's all right.
We've got Jared's got a few messages too. Kim?
Okay, mine's not a question. I was just going to say, with the heat illness and stuff, sometimes you don't realise it's happening.
Yep.
But as a team, it's good to watch out for your mates. I mean, I know we've had it here, and most of the time the person that said, I didn't realise that was happening, but someone else will say, yeah, their decisions were, they made a couple of wrong decisions.
Yep.
Or something, but so just watch out for your mate.
Absolutely, and it's insidious like that. As I said, it sort of sneaks up on you, and you think, I think I'm doing all right, but the person behind you that knows you goes, nah, you're really off the mark, mate. So absolutely, as a team, you need to look at each other and identify when someone's just not acting normally, and that's the subtle but clear indication that perhaps they're suffering from some sort of heat illness. Yeah, thank you.
That's it, yep. Last one.
Well-
Lucky last.
Do kids heat up a lot quicker than the adults do?
Good question.
Because my young son, he gets headaches quite often when he's exercising. Yeah, so
It's two types of sweat balls, and until reach puberty, you don't get all that. They don't become fully developed. So yes, up to puberty age 14, that's a crucial age.
so they won't do
Yep.
I reckon me put a big round of applause for Glenn for giving up his time tonight.
Thank you.
So, as you know, especially for, I suppose, a lot of newer people in the group, we've got Sean, obviously, who asked some questions, so whack your hand up, Sean, so all the new people know, but Sean's obviously been in the firefighter service up here in the NT for about the last, 12 years, so it's pretty close, give or take. Obviously, Craig's in the police tactical response, and he's our fitness guy, and also done a lot of medic work before as well, so if you do have any further questions, obviously Glenn's very busy and he's got to rock and roll, but make sure you see one of our sports trainers, or so we've got obviously Kim in the room tonight. Might get the ladies to put their hands up. Kim, Sharon, Joe up the back. Can't see a couple of the others tonight. Simo and that's not here, but definitely see our sports trainers, or see Nugget and Sean, and feel free to ask them some more questions that you may have or you might think of tonight. You see them on the weekend, then feel free to ask them the questions, and hopefully they'll be able to answer your question from there. But big thank you for Glenn for giving up his time tonight. I know
Thank
he's on away to another meeting. I know Jared and myself got a couple of quick ones, so while Glenn's just packing up his laptop here for a minute, I suppose for us, the main one, what I wanted to touch on, in case you are injured tonight, to make sure we all go through the correct procedures. So by now, we printed 200 of these manuals up. For some reason, I've still got 150 of them in milk crates, so that's not a good sign. And you leave the vicinity